Today's podcast is brought to you by newspapers.com, the ultimate destination for exploring the mysteries of the past. Now, most of my own work uncovering the world of Joe Petrosino and his Italian squad, their stories, the characters they battled, the dark history of the Black Hand, it's all been pieced together thanks to newspapers.com. And I have to tell you, they do what I love most, bringing the past back to life and ensuring it doesn't fade away in the crumbling pages of old newspapers. So whether you're into famous crimes or forgotten cases, newspapers.com gives you a front row seat to over 300 years of history. With more than 1 billion pages of newspapers from the U.S. and beyond, you can search it all in seconds. It's a goldmine of eyewitness accounts, crime scene photos, news reports, and more. And for our listeners, newspapers.com has a special offer. Use the code Italian Squad for an exclusive 20% discount on your subscription. That's promo code Italian Squad at newspapers.com. Previously on True Crimes of Black Hand, New York.
This is the story of one complicated immigrant's journey for success and prosperity, but finding that he was willing to do lots of things to achieve money, fame, and power.
Joanne Sperando introduced us to her notorious great-grandfather, Raffaele Cascone, the king of Mulberry Street.
After the shooting, Raffaele returns to his saloon at 109 Mulberry, and he is in there drinking when the police come in and arrest him. And he was indicted for murder in the first degree.
I'm Anthony Cicchino, and this is The King of Mulberry Street on True Crimes of Black Hand, New York. So, Joanne, your great-grandfather, Raffaele, is now in court facing murder charges for the deaths of Siniscalchis and Giacomo Santaniello. And Raffaele's brother, Domenico, was also indicted in the shooting, but he escaped the police and has just completely vanished. So Raffaele is on his own. When does the trial start?
The trial begins October 14th of that year. The trial transcript is 4 binders filled with over 1,200 pages of testimony. And they actually present many, many witnesses. Some people say that Domenico did the shooting. Some people say that Raffaele did the shooting. Some people say that someone else entirely did the shooting. And there's a lot of confusion because they've got a lot of people saying different things.
You mentioned in the previous episode that just before Siniscalchis died, he indicated Raffaele as the shooter. Now, I'm using the word indicated because he couldn't speak, right?
Correct.
His jaw had been half blown off. And a police officer supposedly noted his gestures down on an envelope in the hospital.
Absolutely. And the envelope that had the notes on it was actually submitted for evidence.
Okay, so now Maria Siniscalchis is going to take the stand against Cascone. She and her husband, Augusto, and he's the cousin to the victim, Tirigi, they lived above Cascone's old restaurant, to remind listeners. I assume the tension only escalates when she testifies for the prosecution. And I'm wondering, did she bring any bombshells?
Well, Maria testifies that Cascone, days before the shooting, said to her, "Your family stinks, and they insulted and slapped my brother. I have a shotgun." He was very clear about what he wanted to do. He seems to be warning her to send the message through the family that you're going to have to pay for this insult. You're going to have to pay for it.
So it's like premeditated murder kind of stuff.
You know, Maria testifies that he threatened her husband's family.
They also have women who are pressed into working at his brothel, testify against him.
Yeah, well, they're trying to really discredit him. And they're 2 local women who say that he forced them to work in this brothel, and they essentially show what a lack of character he had.
So that's the prosecution case. Cascone is really painted as a terrible guy, lack of character, premeditating this murder. What's Cascone's representation like? What are they trying to argue?
I believe that the representation that Cascone got was not of a high quality attorney. It was agreed upon by everyone who kind of witnessed the trial that the language barrier was one issue.
Was it an Italian attorney or
No.
this is even potentially like sort of a cultural problem of
definitely.
not understanding each other and yeah.
One other thing I want to mention, Anthony, and I read this many times, the Italians of that time felt that all of this, everything that was going on in Little Italy and in their community, they didn't want outsiders. They looked at the police as interlopers.
Yeah.
We will handle this. This is our problem. You know, Cascone, after he knew the names of the people that were involved in the 1899 shooting, he wouldn't give the names to the police.
It's not surprising, especially in those years. I mean, this is, a full year before the Italian squad is formed.
Yeah.
And the majority of police in Little Italy were of German and Irish descent. Mm-hmm. So those officers couldn't even communicate with the Italian immigrants who lived there.
Yes.
I mean, there was the cultural aspect of Southern Italians and sort of the lack of, let's say, trust in police and power in Italy.
Yeah.
They brought that with them, for
definitely.
sure. And that's compounded by the fact that they don't even have Italian police officers to talk to.
Right.
So I understand that they don't want to. But it's almost that sense of omerta, right? That even Cascone himself doesn't give the names.
Right.
So what is their defense?
They do their best to shift complete blame to Domenico. They think that's their get out of jail card. And because he is disappeared, gone, they can't question him.
Yeah.
They just, have to rely on witnesses. So he is found guilty on the 28th of October, and he receives a death sentence. Yeah, when the judge sentences him. And they say your death will be December 7th.
Oh, wow. So not even 2 months.
Not even.
I mean, 5 weeks or 6 weeks or something like that.
After Cascone is found guilty and sentenced to death, he is escorted to Sing Sing prison in Ossining, New York. They had an electric chair at Sing Sing, and that is the method of how you're put to death.
Do we know how quickly he goes into that appeal process?
Cascone's attorney filed a notice of appeal to the court November 11th, and that stays the execution. So he's on death row in Sing Sing.
What is life like for him in Sing Sing?
He bemoans the conditions there. There are articles that quote Cascone as saying that life on death row in Sing Sing is awful, and that you would not treat a dog the way that they treat men on death row. And I was really fascinated to find out, though, that there's a community, essentially. The men are in their individual cells, and they are allowed out for exercise every day for a certain period of time. But on death row, the rules are very strict, and they have actually elected someone, one of their fellow prisoners, to be the mayor of death row. And that person makes the rules, makes sure the rules are followed, and they use the consensus method. They vote on a lot of things. Cascone talked about singing contests, whistling contests, and that they even played checkers amongst themselves. They each had a board in their cell, and they would shout out their moves to each other.
You figure out some way to make community, and you're all facing the same thing.
The same thing. Yeah. I think he was very impacted by his experience on death row. He did see several men marched to the death chamber and put to death.
Does he have family visit him?
His wife, Carolina, would go to visit him and stash a skin of whiskey behind the radiator in the restroom. Then she would meet him in the visitor's room, and they would speak in Italian. So the guard who was in that room with them did not know what they were saying. And she would say, I have stashed some alcohol for you so that when you take your shower this week, it's tucked here. Go retrieve it. And this only came to light because several times Cascone was found drunk in his cell. The guards could not figure out why he was drunk in his cell.
Yeah.
So they had to watch very closely everything that happened, and they eventually figured out
that she was bringing this up.
Yeah, I just think that's hysterical.
They
were trying to figure out why this man is alone in his cell and drunk as a skunk. And I should also mention that Cascone, ironically enough, was very devoted to the Virgin Mary. And one of his relatives gives him a picture of the Virgin Mary, and he puts it up in his cell in Sing Sing. He spends a lot of time in prayer on his knees, praying to the Virgin Mary for deliverance. I believe that. I believe that was, I think even the guards mentioned it in some articles that I read.
There are some other characters on death row. And this interests me about Cascone because he's sort of like the Italian Forrest Gump. You know, he's kind of meeting all kinds of famous people, happens to be in the right place at the right time. Who are some of these people in Sing Sing?
Well, in Sing Sing, he meets Albert T. Patrick, who is a famous attorney who is on death row himself for conspiring in the murder of his former client, William Marsh Rice.
Who basically founded Rice University in Texas.
Yes. Patrick helps Cascone with his appeal and really kind of gives him lawyer counseling, right then and there on death row.
So Cascone was on death row from November 1903 to June of 1907.
Correct.
It's about 3.5 years, give or take. Given that he eventually won a new trial, it seems that Patrick's advice and help must have made a real difference, right?
Yes. So Cascone wins a new trial in June of 1907. He leaves Sing Sing, and he's returned to the Tombs in New York.
Okay, let me just say for context, for someone who might not know, the Tombs refers to the infamous downtown Manhattan detention complex.
Yep.
So when Cascone is transferred there, do you think the guys in Sing Sing are going to miss him? Is he going to miss them? I mean, he's been friends with them, right? Mm-hmm. He's seen some of them die.
The day that he left Sing Sing, he shouted out to everyone, all of his fellow prisoners, "I'm leaving you. I wish you good luck, and I wish you a new trial." That was his wish for all of the men that he was leaving behind.
It's easy to judge him when we know the outcome of all of this. Mm. But at this point, certainly his appeal is granted because they thought that the 1903 trial was problematic, not because they thought he was innocent.
Correct. They believed that there were some rules of evidence that were questioned. Mm-hmm. There was the matter of Domenico not being found, not able to get his input.
Also, there was questions about whether Cascone actually even understood when he was in the hospital and they were standing in front of the victim.
Yep.
And then also was that question of bringing in the women who were prostitutes. They argued in the appeal that had nothing to do
with the crime, right?
And they had everything to do with just making him look
discrediting
him. And that should not have been permitted. So now he goes to the Tombs, but he still has to wait a little bit for his trial. What is life like for him in the Tombs? And he strikes up an odd friendship yet again.
Yes.
What is that about?
While he's in the Tombs, he manages to strike up a friendship with a millionaire whose name was Harry K. Thaw. He was a millionaire who murdered Stanford White, who was a renowned architect.
When Thaw killed Stanford White, it was known as the trial of the century.
That's right.
For you New Yorkers, Stanford White designed the Washington Square Arch, in Washington Square Park.
And didn't he also design Madison Square Garden?
That's right. Yeah, that ends up where he's murdered.
Yeah.
He was killed on the rooftop there.
That's right. But somehow, my great-grandfather manages to form a relationship with this man to the exclusion of everyone else.
And how do we know that Thaw is only speaking to Cascone?
It is documented in many, many articles. And remember, they're interviewing the prison guards, this millionaire who's in jail. He's having food brought in from I think they even mentioned Delmonico's. Were they?
Yeah.
Were they there at the time? I remember reading that. So he's having food brought in. He's being visited by his wife, the famous Evelyn Nesbit, and his mother. And do you know that every time they come, they go and visit with Cascone and talk to him in the tombs? And they said that Harry Thaw was kind of a scrawny, skinny guy, and that Cascone trains him, and that they exercise together every day. And they walk around the compound, they're running, they're playing catch, they're showing off, they're having fun. And I just find that so ironic that the Italian immigrant and the millionaire are now thick as thieves. Now, you should also know, Anthony, that Harry Thaw gave Cascone money.
Oh, he did?
He did give him money.
I see.
To help him financially, to hire an attorney, just to help with all of his legal expenses.
Okay, so with the financial backing from Harry Thaw, Cascone is back in court in 1907, trying to overturn his 1903 murder conviction for the deaths of Luigi Siniscalchi and Giacomo Santaniello, right?
Yes.
Maria Siniscalchi then takes center stage once again.
Correct.
And I just want to remind our listeners that Maria is the wife of Cascone's former ally turned enemy, Augusto Siniscalchi, and cousin to Luigi.
Yep.
Seems the press is following this trial pretty closely, and they actually dub her Maria the Beautiful Tambourine Girl. What's going on with that?
Yes. So when Maria first came here to America, she would be a street performer. She had a tambourine and performed to make money. She met Siniscalchi, I believe she met him in Boston, and they were married. And they eventually come to New York. They live with Raffaele Cascone in Brooklyn. Augusto turns out to be very abusive. There was an accusation that her husband wanted her to be a prostitute to earn money. She is brought to testify in the new trial, and unfortunately she lies on the stand. We come to find out that she is an employee of the New York City Police Department. She is acting as an interpreter. She goes into the community because she's an Italian immigrant herself, to find witnesses in other cases. At first, when she's questioned, she denies it. But the lawyers actually run out, go get receipts, and show them to her while she's on the stand.
That she's being paid by the police department?
Yes, that she's being paid by the police department. So, that was quite a shock to the jury.
So in addition to Maria's shocking revelations on the stand, Cascone's own sister, Cherubina, and I think she's also called Rubina.
Yeah.
So she testifies too, right?
Yes.
What did she have to say during the trial?
Yes, Cherubina testifies. She lives in Italy, of course. She comes to New York, and she testifies that Maria approached her in Italy after the first trial, saying, "I will recant my testimony if you give me $1,000.
Oh, wow.
Now, Anthony, I don't know if this is true. Did Rubina make it up? I don't know. But it was certainly something that discounted Maria Siniscalchi's testimony.
Right.
Maria Siniscalchi did travel extensively. So it's possible. And she did go back and forth to Italy several times. That's documented. So the jury was absolutely swayed.
Yeah. So now your great-grandfather's conviction for the 1903 murders of Luigi Siniscalchi, Giacomo Santaniello, is overturned. And I guess he finally receives the deliverance he had hoped for during his time in Sing Sing, right? Where he was constantly praying to the Virgin Mary, asking to be spared. So I'm wondering, now that he's been given his freedom, does he make good on his promises to the Virgin Mary?
Well, upon Cascone's release, that day, he has one of his friends go buy a 5-foot candle, and he removes his shoes and socks and hat, and it's a November in New York, it's cold. And he says that he is going to walk from the tombs all the way up to 116th Street, a 7-mile walk to Our Lady of Mount Carmel Church, holding this candle, walking barefoot to show his gratitude.
And he wants to go to this particular church because this is dedicated to the Virgin?
To the Virgin Mary,
okay.
Yes, who he's dedicated to. And the police approach him. And I believe Petrosino is present.
Mm-hmm.
He has been hearing in the neighborhood that the Siniscalchis and the Santaniellos want revenge, and they're going to kill him. They want to kill him. And if I am not mistaken, the Italian squad was present at the court in force, and they arrested members of the two families who were carrying guns and knives.
What do they tell Cascone?
They say to him, please don't do this. It's dangerous. There are people here who want to hurt you. We want you to take a cab up there. But he was very adamant. They really had to talk him out of it because I think he was so grateful to be released. He felt compelled to do this as a tribute and to show his gratitude. Yeah. So it takes a little bit of convincing, but they do finally convince him.
After offering his candle inside the church, he returns home to Mulberry Street for the first time in years.
Yeah.
What was that like?
So Cascone that night goes back to Mulberry Street. There's hundreds of people in the streets celebrating his release.
Mm-hmm.
And here comes Harry Thaw's wife, Evelyn Nesbet, in a car, like a fancy car, rolling down Mulberry Street to congratulate him. Now, reporters are interviewing Cascone, and he is talking about how happy he is, but he says, please say something nice about Mr. Thaw. He helped me.
I got to return to the Virgin Mary because your great-grandfather doesn't seem to think that his short pilgrimage to that church in Italian Harlem was enough.
No. To show his appreciation, Cascone commissions the Agello brothers to build a 12 feet tall, 300-pound candle adorned with beautiful religious pictures and images of the Virgin Mary and flowers. They said that it would burn for the time that he was in Sing Sing, and that was going to be his offering to show his gratitude.
So now, do we witness Cascone, the upstanding citizen?
Unfortunately, no. Cascone returns to, life on Mulberry Street and kind of resumes everything. The brothel side of things and the prostitution are still going strong. Mm-hmm. And Cascone is arrested in Pittsburgh in 1909 for pursuing a married woman and her husband that he wanted her either for himself or to work in the brothel. We're not sure. They were terrified. They were absolutely terrified of him.
Yeah.
And he also gets arrested in New York for running a gambling den.
But there are no trials? He doesn't go on trial for anything? He's just arrested? And what does he have to pay, a fine or something
like that? He paid a fine in Pittsburgh, and they let him go. And
then the summer of 1909, it's August. There's a story brewing that Cascone is not even aware of. What is that story?
Well, the story is that those two men that he supposedly killed in 1903, that when that happened and the news reached Italy, an 11-year-old boy, his name is Amato Santaniello, who was the brother of one victim and the cousin of the other, swears vengeance on Cascone to get revenge for his murdered family members.
Yeah.
And in 1909, he's now 17 years old, and he makes the journey, and he comes to New York, and he starts stalking Raffaele Cascone. He is studying his schedule. He is learning as much as he possibly can about Raffaele Cascone and his family. So in August of 1909, Raffaele Cascone is sent out by his wife to go get some fruit from a local street vendor. And he's simply walking along, as he always does, walking along Mulberry Street, and 5 shots ring out, and 2 enter his body. The folks in the neighborhood know him, and they bring him back to his saloon at 109 Mulberry. And his wife is there. They lay him across 2 chairs. She's holding his head, and he's still alive. Amato Santaniello, after he shot Cascone, he just takes off. But the police are always around, and they grab him, and they actually bring him back into the saloon. And Cascone says, "Yep, that's him. That's the man who shot me." And before anyone can do anything, Cascone jumps up from his bed with a dirk in his hand, and he slices Amato across the face. So now they've got to get Cascone to the hospital. Now they have to get Amato to the hospital. So Cascone, they said he got into the ambulance on his own power, but holding his stomach.
Yeah.
It looks like the shots came from behind and penetrated his abdomen.
How old is Cascone at this point?
He's 42 years old at this time.
Oh, he's only 42 years old?
Yeah, young man, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Cascone is in the hospital and he's dying. The police are there, and he gives a confession that he did kill in 1903 the two men who beat up his brother, that he did kill them.
So even though his conviction for the 1903 murders of Torrigi and Giacomo were just overturned,
yes,
he confesses now that he actually did kill them?
Correct. I did want to mention, Anthony, that while he's on his deathbed, he's telling his wife who owes him money.
Mm-hmm.
And he is telling her how to collect.
Yeah.
And that, I guess he knows he's dying. And he's trying to give her the information to, so that she can go on, I guess.
And how does that turn out?
I don't know what happened there because he ends up dying the next day at 1:25 in the afternoon. So he lingered just for one day.
Yeah.
And by the way, Amato Santaniello, the guy who shot him, is in the hospital himself, recuperating from being slashed a few times by Cascone.
Yeah.
And he is supposedly, the papers report, screaming and yelling, "I hope he dies. I hope he dies. He killed my brother. He killed my cousin. I hope he dies."
Yeah.
But Amato will be stitched up and recover.
Okay.
Cascone dies the next day.
So the king of Mulberry Street is dead. What can you tell us about the funeral?
He is laid out in his home. I believe the candle is right next to the casket, that huge candle that he had made. There's a lot of articles about his funeral.
Yeah.
They said that it was led by a band. So they marched from Mulberry Street to
Calvary?
Calvary. That's in Queens. The candle is being carried.
Yeah.
There were many carriages. And the Italian squad, again, have now heard in the neighborhood that there's going to be trouble at the funeral, which surprised me because now he's dead. And wouldn't you think that would be the end of it?
Yeah.
But what happened was a vendetta was established. And just because Cascone is dead, it's not over. So they were told there was going to be trouble at the funeral, and the police were there in force.
So he goes to Calvary Cemetery in Queens, and it's interesting because, Petrosino's procession was also from Mulberry Street.
And he's buried also at Calvary.
And to Calvary, although 250,000 people were at Petrosino's funeral just a few months earlier. What kind of a grave does a man who is known as the King of Mulberry Street get?
Yeah.
I imagine, I love these old New York cemeteries, and you see these huge monuments, obelisks, pyramids, you name it, like houses, cathedrals, these
mausoleums.
tombs. Mausoleums.
We expected to find something grandiose. He had a lot of money. And we come to find out his grave is unmarked.
There are no headstones.
There is no headstone. He is in Section 39, Range 2, Plot K, grave number 12. And when I called the cemetery first, they actually placed a marker for us. Now, why did a man who had the means not have any kind of a marking there? Was it because he was a bad man? Did the cemetery or the police have, something to do with that? I don't know. And if you want your hair to stand up on end, Anthony, I remember when we finally got there, my dad starts speaking in Italian to the ground, and I could feel the hairs on my neck go up. And I said, "Dad, what are you saying?" he said, I said, grandfather, as many years that I have looked for you, and I want you to know that the generations that came after you are good people who lead good lives, and I'm glad that we found you, even though that he led that kind of life.
Well, that does bring up a question here, as we, I guess, wrap this up, is what does it mean to you when you discover, like, you had a bad guy in your family history?
Well, I would say, my dad and I went on this journey together, and we were both disappointed and kind of shocked because all four of my grandparents were Italian immigrants who did nothing but work hard, work honestly to do the best they could for their families. And it was really shocking to find out that, that there's a criminal. This man was a criminal, and he did very bad things. It was definitely a mixed bag of feelings to find out that your ancestor was, not the person that you hoped they were. But Anthony, there's a famous saying. I think it was George Bernard Shaw. Don't quote me.
Yeah.
But the saying goes, if you've got a family skeleton in the closet, you best make it dance. So Dad and I felt like, all right, we're going to embrace this experience. Yeah.
And you certainly did that.
Anthony, there's just one more thing I have to tell you.
Yeah.
In the 1920s, my grandmother had arrived in 1919. Now her father's dead. She's married to Joanne Sperando. They're living in Ozone Park. And one night late, there's a knock at the door. And my grandfather, they're surprised because it's late. He opens the door and there's two men standing there holding a man in the middle by the arms. And he looks like he's about to burst into tears. The man says to my grandfather, does Maria Cascone live here? And my grandfather said, yes, she's here. And we want to speak to her. So he very hesitantly lets them in. They walk into the living room where my grandparents were just like listening to the radio. And they throw this man at my grandmother's feet. And they say, this is the man that killed your father. What do you want us to do with him?
Wow.
And he was begging at my grandmother's feet. They're going to kill me. They're going to kill me. My grandparents were horrified and very, very frightened. This was completely foreign to them. And my grandmother did not hesitate. And she said to the men, I want you to let him go. Let him go. Not another word was exchanged. They picked him up off the floor and they disappeared into the night.
And you don't know what happened to him, or did you ever look him up or anything?
It's my understanding that when my dad went to Italy to visit family in the 1980s, we do know that Amato returned to Italy.
Oh, he did?
So they did not kill him.
Well, this is an amazing story, and I wish you luck as you write this.
It's definitely a great story. Thanks, Anthony.
I want to thank my guest, Joanne Sperando, for sharing her family's history with us, and to you, our listeners, for your support and curiosity as we continue to explore the world of Detective Joe Petrosino and the shadowy legacy of the Black Hand. This episode was produced and written by me, with research provided by myself and Payleen Levent. Theme music by Mick Giacchino. And special thanks to Mark Delforti for his patience with my endless technical and creative questions as I work to get these first episodes off the ground. For True Crimes of Black Hand, New York, I'm Anthony Giacchino. See you next time.